Believe it or not, but a lot of audiophiles actually care about and respect the Apple AirPods Pro. Or at least they did until these ones, because these are the Apple AirPods Pro 3, and they are turning out to be a little bit controversial. Now, to some degree, I'm not surprised, because anytime you make changes to a popular and beloved product like the AirPods Pro 2, well, it's bound to be inherently risky. Even if it's a good change or a bad change, it's gonna be risky. And if I'm honest, like some of the concerns that people have with the AirPods Pro 3, I share these concerns, but ultimately, I don't hate this product. Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan. This is Super Review, and normally I review audiophile earphones and headphones. You might be wondering, why is an audiophile reviewing a pair of Bluetooth headphones? Well, the truth is that I don't think Bluetooth is the bottleneck to sound quality that a lot of people think it is, and to that point, the Apple AirPods Pro 2, these are just a legitimately good sounding pair of earphones. These sound better than most similarly priced audiophile earphones, and you could maybe even arguably say the same about these, but that does maybe make you wonder, what does it even mean to sound better? What is sound quality? And frankly, does sound quality even matter for a product like this? Well, for the past couple of weeks, I've been listening to the AirPods Pro 3, and I'm ready to let you know what I think from an audiophile's perspective. But before we get to that, a quick shout out to my wife for loaning these things to me for the past couple of weeks. If you want to check out the AirPods Pro 3, I will have them linked in the description down below. But with that said, let's get on with the review. So now normally at this point, I'll talk about what comes inside the box, the build quality, fit and comfort, and then talk about sound quality. And well, we're still gonna do that, but because there are ostensibly a bunch of new people watching this channel, people that are not used to hearing an audio nerd like me talk about sound quality, I wanted to monologue for a bit on what even is sound quality. Because I think this is actually pretty interesting. And I think for most people, most average consumers out there, sound quality as an idea is just kind of like this linear spectrum of bad sound quality to good, better, and best. But I think the difference between your average consumer of an AirPods Pro or similar and an audio nerd like me is that we actually see sound quality as a lot more complicated than that. The sound quality is a spectrum of different sound signatures. And on top of that, it's a spectrum of people with different preferences. And while I think this is absolutely true for people that are into the hobby of audio, I think it's also true for normal consumers. They just don't know about it. So if you ever hear someone say that they love a particular sound of a headphone or an earphone, and you don't feel the same, well, that's because of what I'm talking about right now, or even the opposite. Now, I'm planning to do a longer video on this topic of sound quality, and if you like the idea of that sounds interesting to you, or you just like the idea of chasing sound and finding your own preferred sound signature, subscribe to the channel because we got a lot more coming up. Okay, back to our regularly scheduled review. We're going to talk about what comes inside the box, physical form factor, build quality, fit and comfort, all that stuff about the AirPods Pro. And then, of course, we're also going to talk about the functionality because this is a complicated product. And if I'm honest, the functionality is in a lot of ways more important than the sound quality. But of course, we will also talk about the sound quality on these earphones. But to start, here is the box and here's what you get inside of it. Controversially, you might notice there's no charging cable, which to me doesn't bother me that much, but if you really need a USB-C cable, you're not gonna get one inside the box of this thing. Apart from that, you do get the AirPods and the AirPods case, but also some new ear tips. This is really the only accessory that's included. And while it looks mostly the same as the ear tips that come on the previous gen AirPods, they are slightly different. For starters, they come in multiple sizes or more sizes. These come in 5 different sizes, whereas the other ones only come in 4 different sizes. So that's nice. It's basically just this new extra small size. And apart from that, well, they're still like mostly a silicone, but you've probably heard that they are also a kind of foam hybrid ear tip. I guess just a quick note on that is that there is no foam that is exposed to the outside world. So if you're concerned about them getting like moist and gunky and nasty the way that foam ear tips typically can, you're not gonna have to worry about that here with these new ear tips because they are entirely encased in silicone. They are, for the most part, the same as the old ear tips, but they're just not gonna be cross-compatible. Apart from that, of course, we've got the AirPods themselves, and let's start by just talking about this case, which I've got a couple of concerns. One is it's just a little bit larger than the outgoing case in the AirPods Pro 2, and I guess this is the one. And that's a little bit of a bummer for me because the size of the case, how compact it is, has been one of the big advantages of the Apple AirPods just ever since their inception. And seeing the case get slightly bigger is a little bit of a disappointment, if I'm honest. But I will say that in practice, it hasn't impacted my life negatively. In fact, when I was walking around with both of these things in my pocket, I couldn't tell which one was which without pulling them out and looking at them. So I guess a bit of a nothing burger in that regard. The one thing, however, that I still haven't gotten over is the sound quality of the case. And I'm not talking about the speaker that's built inside of it. I'm talking about this mechanism. Because this is, okay, the original AirPods, these have, I think, the best sounding case, right? If you're into, this is a fidget toy. Can you hear that? It's a nice, pleasant thok. Whereas over here with the new AirPods Pro 3, it's more of a high frequency kind of clack sound. And I don't like that as much. Okay, that might be the most audiophile thing I've said yet. But yeah, maybe a little bit disappointing, but not a big disappointment. Now, apart from that, of course, we can talk about the earpieces, which for the most part, we're going to be talking about fit and comfort with these things. I mean, I think they look pretty cool, but they look basically just like the older AirPods, although slightly different in terms of shape. And mostly that shape is going to impact fit and comfort. And I'm going to say right now, for me, it's just 100% better across the board. And for me, fit kind of comes down to, I don't know, two main categories, right? There's comfort, right? How comfortable are they to sit inside the ear? How long can I wear them without any sort of fatigue? And then there's fit stability, which is as I'm doing things, whether I'm doing exercise or sleeping or just being lazy, how well do they just stay in my ears? And both of these categories are frankly going to be things that are going to vary drastically ear to ear, right? So you're probably going to hear different takes from different people. And unfortunately, this is a thing where I can give you my take, but I can't promise that this is going to be your take or your experience as well. But what I'll say is that in terms of comfort, they're better for me. With the older AirPods, I would get slight pressure down here on this part of my ear after wearing them for about 20 or 30 minutes. That I just don't have that issue here with the AirPods Pro 3. The other thing that is a big benefit for me, and this is the bigger difference, is the fit stability. Because with the older AirPods, especially as like moisture would start to build up in my ear, they would just kind of gradually work themselves out a little bit. And so I would have to occasionally reach up and plug them back in to get a good seal. The AirPods Pro 3, I don't have to do that at all. They fit in a little bit deeper into the ear canal, which for me, being used to wearing IEMs is perfectly comfortable. But I think the side effect of that is that they are just a much more stable fitting earphone. And I think that's true for most people. I think the biggest kind of a question mark out there is in terms of comfort. That's going to vary a lot between different people. Now, I will say, I mentioned my wife is loaning me these for review. When she initially got these, she was actually kind of disappointed in the comfort. She loves the AirPods Pro 2. She uses them much more than I use AirPods. But these, well, they just weren't very comfortable for her. What she did find is that by switching ear tips, going down a size, she was able to get them to a point where she is happy with the comfort. Apart from that, anything else to talk about the build quality? Okay, let's talk about the controls in these things briefly. Just because this is a thing that is frankly kind of a limitation and a problem on a lot of Bluetooth products like this, where you've got touch controls on the outside and just like handling the product, putting it in and out of your ear, in and out of the case, accidentally toggling play and pause. Like this is a thing that drives me nuts with most Bluetooth products. And okay, AirPods just generally do it pretty well. And that's still the case here with the AirPods Pro 3. To toggle play and pause, well, one, I can't even do it when they're not in my ear. But once they're in my ear, you have to like apply pressure to this stem and it kind of simulates a click. So it's kind of like a physical control, which is to say like you're just not going to be doing anything accidentally on these things as you're handling them when you're not listening to music. And I think that's awesome. Other things, other controls that they have, I mean, there's not a lot. There is volume control. So you can notice here on the stem, there's like this flat area. Let's see if I can get the light to catch that. If you just rub your finger up on that little flat area, you'll increase the volume. And if you rub it down, you'll decrease the volume. You'll hear a little click when it happens. And almost, again, simulates a physical clicking sound. And yeah, generally it is nice to have access to that. And then the other control is you can kind of customize what you want a long click to be, right? If you want to click and hold, I have that set to toggle between transparency mode and noise canceling, but I think you can also customize it to other things. So generally controls are pretty simple, not very complex, but also just kind of executed exactly perfectly, which I guess is getting us into talking about functionality. So let's talk a little bit about the functionality of these earphones. And I'm going to do this a little bit rapid fire style because there's, again, a lot that you could talk about the Apple AirPods Pro. And well, I don't know, there's a lot of the features that frankly I don't use. Like the translation features, that's a cool feature. I don't use that, so I apologize. So let's just kind of do rapid fire, the things that I do care about, and I'm gonna give them kind of like a win or a fail. So in terms of like the pairing and multi-point connection stuff, Apple is just always a win for me in that regard. That's one of the things, again, I like about using Apple's products is that if you happen to use a MacBook, an iPhone, an iPad, and an Apple TV, what's cool about these is that you only have to pair them once and they're automatically paired with everything else. If you don't happen to use a bunch of Apple stuff, well, pairing them is just kind of like your normal Bluetooth pairing, so it's nothing special there. And then maybe on top of that, there is actually a little bit of a limitation in that I don't think these support multi-point in the traditional way, right? So if you're using an Android phone and like a Windows laptop, you can't pair this to both of those at the same time the way that you could with a lot of other Bluetooth products. Kind of disappointing, but if you do live in the Apple ecosystem, as I do, it's actually pretty nice the way that it works as is. I wish you didn't have to make that trade-off and feel like there probably isn't any real reason that you need to make that trade-off, but Apple makes you make that trade-off. So there is that. In terms of Bluetooth, just general functionality, like range and stability, a little bit of a fail here, actually. The Bluetooth range on this is just slightly worse than the Bluetooth range on the AirPods Pro 2 and the 1. I don't know exactly why. It might actually have something to do with the way that these things are fitting a little bit deeper in my ear. Apologies if my Bluetooth range test is not the same as yours, but typically I'll be, watching a YouTube video while sitting on the couch, and sometimes I have to get up and go to the bathroom or go into the backyard and do something or go into my garage. And the AirPods Pro 1 and 2 just have excellent range to the point that I can do all that without having to take my laptop around with me. Unfortunately, with the AirPods Pro 3, it's like just slightly worse enough that I've run into limitations where it won't reach my bathroom, which, I don't know, maybe you're thinking I shouldn't be listening to a YouTube video in the bathroom, but there's a good chance you're watching this YouTube video in the bathroom, so don't judge me. So I don't know, a little bit of a fail there. Now, a win, I'm gonna say, is for the active noise canceling quality, which you've probably heard a lot of people talk about. In fact, I think most people that are reviewing this product are going to talk more about the active noise canceling than they are going to talk about sound quality, because I don't know, frankly, it feels like a lot of people are just like active noise canceling enthusiasts in the way that like I'm a sound quality enthusiast. And personally, I don't actually get it that much. I mean, they do have fantastic active noise canceling. And yes, it is better than the AirPods Pro 2. But is it so much better that it makes a difference in my life? Probably not. It is better. I just don't really care that much about it. Something that's a little bit of a draw in terms of this rapid fire is going to be battery life. Now, the advertised battery life of these things when they're not inside the case is up from about 6 hours on the AirPods Pro 2 to 8 hours on the Pro 3. And that is a useful difference. It's only about like 30% difference, but actually 30% is a pretty big improvement. That's with noise canceling. But the real difference is that like here in the United States, right? If I were to fly from California to New York, it's about a 5-hour flight, which is really pushing the limits of the AirPods Pro 2. With the AirPods Pro 3, these things can make that comfortably. The other thing that this extended battery life makes them capable of doing is lasting an entire night of sleep, which is a use case that a lot of people have for a pair of AirPods Pro. In fact, I use these myself, sleeping one night at least, and they lasted the entire night, which I don't think has ever happened for me before with a pair of Apple AirPods. Apart from that, I'll say like I just don't normally use a product like this for more than a couple of hours at a time. Frankly, I don't use a product like this for more than about an hour at a time. So it doesn't make a big difference for me, but it could make a big difference for you. And note that it is better battery life generally. The one caveat here is that it turns out that they actually have less battery when you factor in the recharging from the case, which I find really surprising, at least according to their website. The old AirPods Pro 2, on a charge, they say they got 30 hours of usage if you factor in the case. On the AirPods Pro 3, it's down to 24 hours, which is actually surprising, especially, again, given that the case is actually slightly larger than the last one. So better for long flights, better for sleeping, better for using all day at work, but maybe slightly worse if you're going on vacation and you don't want to bring a charger or something like that. Also, now to talk about just a couple of rapid fire features that somewhat actually impact sound quality. There's still no LC3 support, which if you don't know what that is, Bluetooth, I don't know, I think it was like Bluetooth 4 or something like that. They introduced Bluetooth Low Energy. And with that, they introduced this new standard for sound quality, or a new codec for doing like video calls, called the LC3 codec. And one of the biggest concerns and problems that people have with the sound quality of Bluetooth products is when you join a video call, or even just taking a phone call, the sound quality drops dramatically. And that is still the case, unfortunately, with the AirPods Pro 3, because they're not taking advantage of the LC3 codec. They're still using the AAC codec for music listening, which is fine, but when you connect to a video call, they're going to drop back to a really low bitrate SBC codec. And that sounds, frankly, really bad. And unfortunately, they're just not taking advantage of LC3. Apple is just not embracing it in a way that would actually, I think, improve a lot of people's lives if they did. Another thing to talk about is they have like volume-based frequency response adjustment. Basically, they change their sound signature depending on how loud you're listening. It's actually kind of a cool feature, because it means that as you listen at lower volumes, they're going to change the levels of bass and treble to sound like they're at the same level as they would be if you were listening louder, because there's like a difference in the way that people hear those frequencies at different loudnesses. The benefit of it is that I can listen to these things at quieter listening volumes, and they're more satisfying than they would be if they weren't making those adjustments, right? And I like that feature, so I dig that. Another feature that, okay, these things actually don't have, and I think is sorely missing, is any sort of EQ. Okay, there is, like, if you go into the Apple Music app, there are these little EQ presets. Those are frankly useless. Do not look at those things. But there's no system-wide EQ, which there frankly just really should be. And I understand that this is not a feature that is a very Apple-like feature, right? Apple, like customizing your product, Apple doesn't want you to do that. But I'm gonna tell you right now, that would solve a whole lot of problems that audiophiles have with a product like that. And unfortunately, there's just no EQ options here. And the last thing that I wanna talk about in terms of, I guess, the features and the functionality of this device that impacts sound quality is just to kind of complain and rant a little bit about how active these things are. And by active, I mean, well, I talked about how they change their sound signature depending on the volume level. But that's not the only condition that they change things about. They'll also change the sound depending on how good of a seal you have in your ear, or they'll change air pressure levels as they compensate for seal breakages or loudness changes outside your environment. And basically, they're just like kind of constantly fiddling with things in your ear. And as someone who likes to listen to music and be really careful about it, or be very particular about it, I suppose, those kinds of things are actually kind of annoying. It creates weird artifacts. For example, if I'm walking with these things, if they're even slightly loose in my ear, I'll hear kind of like a knocking sound from the active noise cancellation, kind of like compensating for the different changes in pressure levels. Or if I drive my car with the windows down and I have these in my ear in transparency mode, they just make this like awful buffeting sound that frankly makes them not very functional for that purpose, which, I don't know, maybe you shouldn't be driving with AirPods anyway, but people do. Other things, other active things, there's also, I don't know, it seems like it's doing some stuff with the equalization when I'm listening to music in a very particular song. I have a specific test track called Break for Lovers by Men I Trust. And I'll just say right now, nobody else that I've asked to try and reproduce this has been able to reproduce it. So maybe this is particular to me and this particular track, but I actually find the active systems of the AirPods Pro just kind of ruin that song. They're like just kind of introducing these little artifacts in the sound quality, which are not Bluetooth related. They're not, you know, compression related. They're just these things being a little bit too hyperactive. And I didn't notice it for most of my music, but I did notice it for my favorite song, which is a little bit disappointing. But that said, how do these things fare for the rest of the sound quality stuff? Okay, let's finally talk about the sound quality on the AirPods Pro 3, but to start, I kind of wanted to talk about the sound of the AirPods Pro 2, because we're gonna use this to contextualize a lot. And the AirPods Pro 2 are, well, frankly, a surprisingly good sounding earphone. It is kind of a neutral sounding earphone. Not exactly neutral, it's a little bit on the warm side, which is to say it's kind of full, maybe even slightly stuffy sounding. It's a little bit on the soft side rather than being like thin and contrasty and sharply defined, if those words make sense to you. But generally a very nicely tuned earphone that can be slightly on the bassy side, but generally works really well for a lot of music. People's complaints about these things, I have heard some people will say it just doesn't have enough bass. And for a lot of people, there's no such thing as enough bass. So yeah, these are not super bassy. So I'm not surprised that some people will make that complaint. Another complaint is that people will say that they are a little bit on the muddy sounding side. And that's not too surprising, again, given that these are kind of warm tilted, a little bit full in the lower mid-range. It can give it a little bit of a stuffy, kind of muddy sound, depending on the music that you're listening to. Personally, I don't have that complaint. I think these things sound, frankly, pretty good. But how does that compare with the Apple AirPods Pro 3? Now, to do this analysis, we're actually going to jump over to SquigLink, where I've got the frequency response of the AirPods Pro 3 as well as the AirPods Pro 2. And what we're going to do, unlike what we typically do, I'm going to disable my normal target, and we're going to baseline everything to the AirPods Pro 2, which is probably the only thing in my database that you really should be comparing this frequency response to. So we've got the AirPods Pro 2 frequency response in blue, and we've got the AirPods Pro 3 in red here. And the differences that you can see, the major differences are going to be these two things, right? We've got more bass and we've got more treble, which means that the AirPods Pro 3 are ultimately more of a V-shaped sound signature versus the roughly warm neutral sound signature that we have on the AirPods Pro 2. Now, a couple of notes on that. One, I would say that the V-shape is relatively modest. You can see that these are not a big boost in the bass. In fact, most of the boost in the bass is all below 80 hertz, which is actually pretty low. That's pretty much a sub-bass boost. If anything, there's even a little bit of a dip at around 150 hertz, which what that might sound like is that on certain music, depending on what kind of bass is in the music, the AirPods Pro 3 might actually sound less bassy than the AirPods Pro 2. I've seen some comments on that on Reddit, which doesn't surprise me. Although overall, I think the impression that most people will have is that the new AirPods Pro are a little bit more bassy. Now, kind of coinciding with that, you do have a little bit more treble, which is kind of counterbalancing that added bass. If you have too much bass, you can contribute more to that muddy sound that I described that some people complained about the AirPods Pro 2. So adding a little bit more treble just gives it that contrast that gives you, yes, a V-shaped sound signature, but also keeps things sounding well separated. Anything else to talk about the sound signature before we get into talking about my listening notes? I mean, just overall, yeah, it is a little bit more V-shaped, but I'm going to say also just to kind of contextualize it, it still is somewhat of a warm sounding V-shaped sound signature. In fact, maybe here's a good way to contextualize things, right? If we say that this is more neutral than these, and these are more V-shaped, I think that that's absolutely true, but I think they're probably less V-shaped than something like this, which is more of a Harman target, which is more of a, again, thinner, contrastier, brighter sound signature that just ends up being, I think, a little bit more V-shaped than what we have over here, which is itself less V-shaped than what we might have with a more traditional TWS like this, which is just very V-shaped. So just kind of putting it into context, the AirPods Pro 3 are, yes, more V-shaped than the AirPods Pro 2, but I think they're probably less V-shaped than your average TWS. Yeah, okay. Again, if you thought that the AirPods Pro 2 were maybe a little bit muddy and a little bit bass light, those are probably the types of feedback that Apple was taking into consideration when they retuned this. So you probably are not going to have that concern with the AirPods Pro 3, or at least not as much. Now, how does this actually sit for me? I'm gonna say this thing still sounds really good for a TWS, but I do prefer the sound of the AirPods Pro 2. Just overall, like a more neutral, kind of warmer, relaxed, lower contrast sound signature is very much more up my alley. The AirPods Pro 3, I understand why they've made these changes, and again, I think a lot of people will prefer it, but for me, I still prefer the older sound. That said, I think the benefit of this is that yes, you will get more bass for people that want more bass. It's a little bit on the tubby sounding side, which is just to say that there's a little bit too much sub bass, and it can come across a little bit unnatural and a little bit separated from the rest of the sound signature. Now, the benefit of that sub bass focus is that you get added bass without it sounding extra muddy and extra bloated, but the downside is it comes across a little bit more disconnected. The treble, some people have reported having issues with the treble, it being significantly brighter to them. And I don't think that that is the intended sound. I do not hear these as especially bright. Like I hear these two earphones as notably brighter than the AirPods Pro 2. And these are definitely brighter than the AirPods Pro 2. In fact, I think that these are a little bit worse with sibilance versus the AirPods Pro 2, but I don't hear them to be as bright as something like this. If you're concerned about brightness. And brightness, we're just talking about high frequency sound. So hi-hats, cymbals, and stuff like that. If things are too bright, they might sound a little uncomfortable and annoying to listen to. I didn't really have that problem here with the AirPods Pro 3. But again, still ultimately, I do prefer the sound of the AirPods Pro 2. I would say probably the biggest benefit of the sound signature, if you're into this sort of stuff, is just you're gonna get a stronger sense of separation between instruments, right? If you're into the whole soundstage thing, I think that the AirPods Pro 3 present a slightly wider, again, better separated sound stage that's gonna give you slightly more exaggerated imaging. And that could be definitely a benefit for a lot of people. But again, for me, I understand why people are disappointed that we don't have this sound. All right, that's as much as I can tell you about the Apple AirPods Pro 3. Look, if I was reviewing these just as a normal, typical wired audiophile earphone, they'd probably be like a 3 stars out of 5 type of product for me. They sound good. They sound legitimately better than, frankly, most products, but they don't sound so good that I want to go out of my way to listen to music. The AirPods Pro 2, these sound legitimately good. I would give these things 4 stars out of 5 just on the sound quality. But if I'm honest, like, listening to music is just not my primary use case for a product like this. I'm much more likely to listen to podcasts or listen to YouTube videos and go to the bathroom at the same time. And for that purpose, like, this is still a fantastic product, as are the AirPods Pro 2. In fact, if I were to choose between these, if I had no AirPods and I was buying them from the get-go, even though I prefer the sound quality in the AirPods Pro 2, I'd probably still go with the AirPods Pro 3 because they just fit my ear better. And again, for me, with a product category like this, this is just a lot more important of a factor. Look, out of 5 stars overall as a product, the Apple AirPods Pro 3, that's what this product is, 4 stars out of 5. If you want to check it out, I will have it linked in the description down below. And while you're down there, if you haven't yet, please do hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel for more audio-focused reviews like this. Hit the YouTube bell. Join me on Discord, also linked in the description. And I'll catch you in the next super review. Cheers.
Join with the force of reviews. We now have the tools to brave the misleading world of audio fools. Hey, this review is super, and so are you. Grab your headphones, sniff a graph, and share your thoughts in this pursuit.